all of them your podium and let's start the session. I'm requesting everyone who are standing outside the lobby, please come in. We have an hour.
Hello, everybody. I think we need to try and get this session started and bring people in from outside. We'll embarrass them as they walk in. So my name's Jeff Wood. Some of you know me because I've been working in association with PIDS for a number of years, in particular, Professor Mundell, who most of you know. A lot of you have been his students in the past. And he and I are working on agrarian futures, trying to look at how Bangladesh will look in 20, 30 years' time as it occupies the Delta. So we've got 3 papers here now that are speaking to aspects of that general headline piece of work. So I'm very honoured to be asked to chair this session. And it's a presentation by a team from IFPRI. And on my right is Ben Belton, who is going to be working on aquaculture, doing a presentation on aquaculture. As it happens, I co-authored a book on aquaculture some time ago, so I'm very interested to see how all that's working out. And then I think the next one is Moogdho on my left here, great, who is trying to pinch a bit more time to look at the impacts of mechanized harvesting on farm performance and rural labour, which of course speaks very closely to the kind of work that Sata and I are trying to pursue. So a lot of connection there. And then Mehrab Bakhtiar is going to be looking at social assistance and its effect upon consumption and poverty in Bangladesh. And I've also done lots of work on poverty, most recently with Zulfikar and Belton on extreme poverty. We did a report during COVID for the Planning Commission. So all 3 papers are very close to my own CV, and I look forward to this a lot. Ben, do you want to kick off? Thanks. Everybody's going to have 15 minutes and the bell will ring after 12.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ben Belton from IFPRI. I'm talking today about wholesalers and the transformation of the hidden middle of the aquaculture value chain in Bangladesh. This is work with colleagues from World Fish, Bangladesh Agricultural University, Michigan State University, recently published in the journal Food Security. So as you probably know, aquaculture has grown very rapidly in Bangladesh over the past 30 years. The supply of farmed aquatic food increased 4 times since 2000. And as that supply has increased, there's also been a proliferation of wholesalers. So often academic and popular debates assume that wholesalers are exploitative. So in the case of aquaculture in Bangladesh, that means extracting surpluses through tied output credit or DADON. They're often assumed to be inefficient. So we hear of long supply chains with many actors that push up prices for the consumer. They're often thought to be wasteful, so high rates of loss and waste for fish, which is very perishable. But on the flip side, they're sometimes thought to create many jobs off farm, although these are rarely, the numbers are rarely documented. And so as a result of these perceptions, development projects and programs often seek to upgrade value chains by either improving wholesaler practices or trying to bypass the middlemen altogether. However, there's very little empirical evidence on the performance of fish markets or wholesalers in Bangladesh. And so we set out to try and test this conventional wisdom through statistically representative surveys of fish wholesalers in southern Bangladesh, but also retailers and fish farmers for triangulation. So before I move to the research itself, I'd just like to try and illustrate some of that conventional wisdom with quotes here. So we have several quotes from a publication from 2001, but you see very similar things being repeated up to the present. So fish markets are poorly competitive in Bangladesh. Transport appears to be a big problem for movement of fish. Most rural markets operate under the open sky without facilities. Intermediaries tend to cheat producers by agreeing fish prices amongst themselves. Market intermediaries provide credit to aquaculture producers who are then obliged to sell their products at below the market price. And then often we hear that there's very high levels of loss and waste. So for instance, FAO estimating around 30% levels of loss and waste in fish value chains globally. So it's that sort of conventional wisdom that we sort of set out to test with this study. So the methodology was that we, in 2020, resurveyed fish wholesalers, retailers, and farms in 7 districts of southern Bangladesh. These had already been covered in a survey in 2013. And so having the 2 periods of time allowed us to see how things had changed. So we conducted a representative sample of 4 different types of wholesalers, so auctioneers or aradda, interzone wholesalers who are large wholesalers sending fish to other parts of the country, assemblers or foria who are collecting small quantities of shrimp from farms, and then depots who are buying from the foria and selling to processing plants. And so we sampled the traders in 48 markets in 13 upazila, and we also sampled 100 retailers and more than 700 farms in these upazila. So moving to the results, there are a number of changes in value chain structure. First of all is the establishment of markets in and around fish producing clusters. So 40% of the markets that we surveyed were established since 1990 when this boom in aquaculture began. And most of the most recently established markets were private markets that had been set up close to places where there were high concentrations of fish and shrimp cultivation. Then there's a proliferation of traders in those markets. So the number of traders per market increased by about 2/3 over the past decade. And we have spatial lengthening of the value chain. So the fastest growing segment of traders are these interzone wholesalers who are sending mainly fish to other parts of the country. So their numbers grew by 100% in the past decade. And at the same time, we have disintermediation happening. So between our survey in 2013 and 2020, there was a decrease in traders reporting that they sourced product from their own village. So from 54% of traders getting most of their product from their own village down to 7% in 2020. And conversely, there was an increase in sourcing from elsewhere in the upazila, so from 25% up to 60%. And as part of this disintermediation, we have farmers now traveling directly to market to sell their product at auction. So 89% of the product sold by these araddas, 89% of the product sold by farmers is sold directly by the farmer through an aradda at auction. Only 7% of the product sold to the village assemblers or foria. We also have changes in the conduct of wholesalers. So the share of wholesalers owning a mobile phone increased from about 3/4 to almost 100% between 2013 and 2020. The share of traders using plastic barrels and crates, which help sort of preserve the fish in good condition, increased from 65% to nearly 100%. Big increase in storing fish on ice, up from 28% to almost 2/3 of wholesalers doing that. And across the different types of wholesaler, between about 75 and 100% of those using loose ice. And you can see how important this is because it accounts for between 22 and 28% of operating costs, icing and packaging. And then there was also a big increase in the practice of selling fish alive, so 25% being sold alive, up from 5 or 10% a decade ago. And then also a big increase in procuring fish alive. So 40% of the fish and shrimp in 2020 was procured in live form. When we revisited these areas in 2024, we found that actually almost all of the fish and shrimp is being delivered to wholesale markets alive. As a result of these changing practices, we have extremely low levels of loss and waste in these segments of the value chain. So you can see there's, for the different types of trader, there was very rapid product turnover. They're usually selling out everything on the same day that they purchase it. So there's less chance for the product quality to deteriorate. And really strikingly, across all of these categories of actor, none of them are reporting any physical losses. So nobody having to throw away fish because the quality has deteriorated to a point where it can't be sold. We also see that many of the traders storing product on ice, if there's any left over, and retailers offering small discounts at the end of the day in order to sell out if they need to. But so 16% reduction in the average price charged by retailers if they have to make a quick sale, so only small economic losses. And when we ask farmers about their losses, also we find only 1% reporting that they made any that they lost any product during the harvest and marketing process, and then only a very small quantity. So sort of to illustrate some of the factors that account for this, we have the growth of both local and long distance transport services. You can see these locally manufactured vehicles for transporting live fish to market, and then these much larger vehicles that are hired out for transporting fish and shrimp between cities. In this picture of a wholesale market, you can see good access to ice, the plastic crates that prevent the fish being damaged, insulated boxes that mean the fish can be packed on ice and kept in good condition for a long time. You can see shrimp here being carefully packed with layers of ice before it's transported. And you can see fish being delivered to market alive in these oxygenated barrels, and then it's alive by the time it reaches the wholesaler, and so in good condition. And then it's traveling also to Dhaka oftentimes and other markets alive. So this is a picture in Karam Bazaar. You can see the fish thrashing about there. And so that really helps preserve the quality. Another important change is we see the decline of the importance of tied output credit, or DADON. So the traditional image is that in southern Bangladesh, certainly this is almost universal, but we actually find, although it's most types of trader are offering some DADON to some of their customers, only 17% of farms actually receive this. These are virtually all shrimp farms. And if we look at the value of DADON that's given relative to the total value of product traded, it's very, very small. It's less than 2%. Also, by talking to farmers, we find that there's no interest charged when they take DADON, and there's no significant difference in the rates of commission that they pay to Aradar, whether or not they've received DADON. So really the function of DADON here is for traders to secure supplies of product, particularly shrimp, rather than to extract some kind of an additional surplus from the farmer. We also see that the profit rates of wholesalers are relatively modest, so between sort of 3-4%. And they're also quite low relative to wholesalers of other agricultural commodities. And then finally, we see that there's substantial employment generated in these segments of the value chain. So for these 7 districts of Bangladesh, we estimate more than 40,000 full-time equivalent employment jobs, of which about half are hired, about a third are for youth, but very low levels of employment for women, around 1%. So in conclusion, the aquaculture value chain has transformed rapidly in Bangladesh in all segments, but we see here particularly in the wholesale segment, and that transformation has occurred concurrently with the growth and transformation of the farm segment. The value chain has lengthened geographically, so increasingly large quantities of fish coming from South Bangladesh to the rest of the country, but it's become shorter intermediationally. So farmers going to sell directly at market rather than relying on intermediaries to collect their product. And so farmers prefer to sell at auction because there's a transparent pricing mechanism. They can be fairly confident they're going to get the best available price that are given on a given day. And as we have this proliferation of traders in these markets, there's a lot of competition amongst them. The margins that traders earn on each transaction or over the course of a year are actually fairly modest. And so that translates into low consumer prices. We see also there's a decline in the institution of Dadon, and it's used mainly to secure access to product for shrimp specifically, rather than to sort of extract an additional surplus from the farmer. We see also very low levels of loss and waste, which reflects big improvements in transport, mobility, communications, access to ice and packaging, and the practice of selling fish alive. And then substantial employment generated, particularly for men, some for youth, but very little involvement by women. And then finally, we can say that the wholesaler-farmer relationships tends to be largely symbiotic rather than parasitic, as it's often thought to be. Thank you.
Right on time. Thank you very much. So
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Great to be back at Annual Bee Ideas Development Conference this year. So today's work that I'm going to present with, it's a joint work with my esteemed colleagues over here, Dr. Mehrab and Dr. Ben, and Aminul Karim, who is research analyst at IFPRI. So just to quickly motivate about agricultural mechanization, impact of agricultural mechanization, if you see across countries, especially global south, the developing countries, it's not same in every country, right? So it's mixed. The outcomes in farm performance, employment, labor allocation, overall welfare, it depends on the country and what kind of mechanization you are doing. Some quick examples over here. In China, it was found that agriculture productivity has increased. Labor relocation from farm activities to non-farm activities were spotted when they talked about large-scale mechanization. In India, off-farm economic activities have increased due to mechanization. Migration from agri to non-agri sector has increased. In Myanmar, our colleagues Ben's work, they don't find any major impact on yield and profitability. However, overall time in production has been saved. In Nepal, when we talk about power tiller had no impact on profitability and yield. So basically, the gist of this slide is depending on the machine, depending on the country, depending on the context, depending on how much you're investing on mechanization, your results will depend. So that brings us to Bangladesh. So today, what I'm planning to do, I'm a bit greedy, and this is almost material for 3 papers, but I would like to see how much I could go. So first, I'll give you an overview of agricultural mechanization in Bangladesh. Then I'll talk about the impact on farm performance and incomes. I'll talk about the impact on employment and labor. And then if I have some time, I'll show you some interesting results on our own survey of the machine service providers and imports and dealers. And then I'll end with a policy recommendation. So the big picture idea over here that we all know about agriculture, fortunately or unfortunately, it depends from which angle you are seeing it. there is a reduction in real wage rate in agriculture. There is a reduction in percentage of labor employment in agriculture, and there is an increase of real wage in agriculture in the last 20 years or so. When we talk about overall mechanization, this picture, shows a very bright kind of sectors where mechanization has happened. So this is using BIHS, IFPRI's own survey, Bangladesh Integrated Household Survey, 2011, 15, and 18. Over here, you can say that tillage, irrigation, pesticide sprayer, threshing, it's almost 80 to 90% mechanized overall, right? However, now come to planting and harvesting, the most labor-intensive task in the supply chain. So you see it's less than 1% in planting, and also it's like 0.9%, again, less than 1% in harvesting, and this is 2018. So there hasn't been, harvesting hasn't been mechanized at all till 2018. All right, using this evidence, then we used our another 2023-24 round, and look at this. So at the last column, you can see that harvesting from 0.9% has increased to 20%. So harvesting has become mechanized significantly. All right, so from 0.9% to 20%, it's a big increase. However, planting, as expected, nothing has happened in planting in terms of mechanization. All right, these are the three major programs of government that they have taken from 2005 to 12, 12 to 19, and today we are focusing on 2020 to 24, right? So this is a big subsidy program for Bangladesh, and we are going to analyze this subsidy program impact on a number of outcomes. Just to talk about the administrative data that we have used over here, so this phase 3 agriculture mechanization program, starting in 2019, they have targeted or distributed around 52,000 machines. The biggest chunk of the subsidy has gone to combine harvesters. No surprise, right? So it's almost 1,600 crores. So what? $130 million subsidy has been given on combine harvesters. So this is 85%, 84% of the total subsidy the government has incurred from 2019 to 2023. And as you can see, the subsidy was focused in two areas, especially the higher subsidies. The 70% was given in Howrah and coastal areas, but everywhere else they received 50% subsidy on this machine. So within this 4 years time period, 9,000 combine harvesters were distributed all through Bangladesh. So this is the map, and this is important because this is the geographical variation that I'm going to use for my causal estimation. So over here, the darker light shows that more combine harvesters have gone there, and the lighter one shows less combine harvesters have gone there. And as you can clearly see, the Howrah and coastal areas have received more combine harvester. However, there are many northern districts which also have received combine harvesters. The outcome variable that I'm going to measure in this paper, it's from BIHS. Again, it doesn't need any introduction, one of the best panel data in the world. So we are going to use 2018-19, and then there is a parallel survey that happened in 2023 from the BIHS sample. It's called the SPIA survey. We will use that for our outcome variables. So again, so as I've explained in the map, so there is a distribution in terms of combine harvester, which sub-districts are getting how many combine harvesters, right? So you can see the distribution over here. So basically using this distribution, so we use a cutoff. So in the distribution, if a sub-district has received more than 75th percentile of combine harvesters, we say that this sub-district is our treated group. And if not, then this is a control group. So it's around 26 sub-districts per 26 combine harvesters, per sub-district that we can say that they have been treated. If not, they are controlled. So, and then you can ask me the question like why you are choosing an arbitrary cutoff like that, but I'll show you that it doesn't matter where you take the cutoff for treatment versus control. So what's the theory of change over here? What we are trying to understand is that using combine harvester, basically it could increase the total production. How? Because it improves yield efficiency by providing timely harvest. As you know, it's very important in our area. And reducing the post-harvest loss, which was like technically could be reduced from 1 to 7% in a laboratory setting. Also, it decreases the dependency on labor, so we expect that the labor cost and also the total production cost should decline using these machines efficiently. So that's why we expect there should be some impact on income, but let's see what the empirical finding shows. Again, as I have said, I'm using the canonical DID, difference in difference model. So over here, a sub-district level, it's a treatment if they receive a certain level of combined harvester. If not, they are controlled. And then we have year fixed effect. We have upozilla fixed effect. As you know, these are controlling for many observed and unobserved factors at the sub-district level and the yearly level. So using this empirical specification, so I'm first showing you this graph. This is very important from DID. As you know, the identifying assumption for difference in difference is that your outcome variables were not differently trending in treatment and control areas, right? So this is an even study plot. As you can see in 2018, I'm sorry if you can't see it over here, but 2018 over here, the dot, that means you're comparing from 2018, what happened before. So on the left-hand side, most of these estimates are insignificant. So it means that our outcome variable, let's say the yield or production, they are not varying differently in treatment area and control area. So this satisfies the DID parallel trend assumption, and we can move from there. Same thing, but in numbers right now. So I'll just quickly go over it. The big story is that combined harvesters and mechanized harvesting has increased total production by 6 to 10 percentage point where they have received higher number of combined harvesters or in our treated area. There is a reduction in total labor cost, and that is passing through the total production cost. Of course, mechanized harvesting, the number 3 column, as you can see, is been increased in the treated area. And if we can do a quick calculation of benefit to cost ratio, there is a modest benefit for the farmers using combined harvesters. So that's the story of this slide. Second, then we try to understand, okay, now it's because we think that it's saving some time, whether there is an impact on cropping intensity or some other diversification index. Cropping intensity is positive but statistically insignificant. However, when we measure the diversity index, we see that there is a modest increase. So diversity means whether you are mixing up your production or not. And then we see that most of this production or this increase in production is coming from producing higher fiber related products. Again, we try to do, okay, so after all, whether there is an impact on farm income in terms of revenues or sales, as you can see, and we see there is a modest increase in sales due to combined harvester present. And again, this is coming from, selling more other crops, and fiber crops and other crops include potato, sugarcane, date, palm, tea, tobacco, etc. All right, so now going back to the first question, why 75th percentile as treatment, right? Then we varied that treatment cutoff. So in this picture, what you're seeing, there are 4 graphs. So paddy yield, labor cost, production cost, and benefit cost ratio. And there is, if you can see, there is a mark 75th percentile somewhere. So this one right here. And then we changed the treatment cutoff. So we went lower to 65, 55, 50, and then we higher. So what we observe over here is a linear kind of a trend. So it suggests that more combined harvesters are actually linearly impacting the outcomes. So it doesn't matter whether you choose 75th percentile or 80th percentile or 70th percentile, the pattern of the impact remains same. All right. Now, quickly about some heterogeneity analysis. So we try to understand whether, these results are driven by Howrah and coastal areas, or if some sub-districts are adopting earlier combined harvester, whether they're gonna behave differently with late adopters. So this is a triple DID setting. So you add another dimension in already your 2 dimensions of difference in differences, and then you try the results out. So the third dimension that we are adding over here is the dummy present of Howrah coastal area or early adopter versus late adopter. So just quick results over here that we are observing that in this Howrah and coastal areas, the impact is slightly higher, so 13% higher, whereas on average we found it 6 to 10%, so slightly 3 percentage point higher in Howrah and coastal area in terms of total production. significant reduction in labor and production cost. The benefit cost ratio is slightly higher in these areas. However, we didn't find any impact if some sub-districts are adopting earlier versus late adopters. So it more suggests that it doesn't matter if you have a lot of combined harvesters in early position, it's more about like whether the duration is higher or not. All right, quickly on the labor outcome. So I'll pass the parallel trend. So it also passes it. I'll show you one interesting result first. So in terms of labor and employment, when we have use HIES, what we're finding is very interesting. So overall, if you see the panel B in agricultural employment, self-employment has increased by 4.2 percentage point in agriculture due to combined harvesters presence, and labor employment has decreased by 3.3 to 3.4 percentage point. So altogether, there is a slightly marginal increase in overall employment, if I may say, but there is this two direction that we are observing. And it could change a bit depending on the specification we are using. But the big story, self-employment increasing, labor employment decreasing. I'll go directly to another very interesting finding that we are getting over here. Migration is increasing due to this combined harvester presence. And this is a mechanism still we are trying to understand what's going on over here. But the result is showing that migration driven by foreign migration, 6.1 percentage point higher. And there is a slightly negative impact in domestic migration. So we are seeing some presence of foreign migration due to this heavy combined harvester presence in the sub-districts. Okay, I'll be quick. So this is a result from the machine service provider, right? You know that these are combined harvesters are managed by some service providers. So interesting results over here. So when we did a full length survey of them, so the loan they take to buy or maintain by the combined harvester is mostly informal. We have found that there is almost no presence of formal loans in this sector. So that is where there could be a policy intervention. And yeah, it's mostly informal, or they're taking from MFI or NGOs. Then we did a quick simulation on how much time it takes, how many months it takes for the service provider to return the loan. The green bars, as you see, it takes 31 months or 42 months, depending on what kind of subsidies they are getting. And if you decrease the subsidy, these many months they will take to return the loan they have taken for combined harvester, which is not very high, to be honest. Yeah, I don't have much time over here. I think interesting area. So this is all like how intensive these machines are, and there is a huge demand for these machines. You know, the number of farmers served by one MSP on average is 216, and yeah, so this is quite impactful in terms of what one MSP could do. This is a very interesting result that I was a bit hesitant to show, but now after Dr. Majumdar's presentation, I don't hesitate much. And this is, you can see the link between qualitative results and quantitative results. So what I'm showing you over here, so we had this information from National Bureau of Revenue, NBR. We work with NBR, we got the import information. So on the first price, so these are the players in the combined harvester markets. These are the companies. So we have the average import price. Then on the sales price, we got it from our own survey, right? So you can see there is a difference in the import price of combined harvester and the sales price of combined harvester. And I mean, as an economist, we don't mind any difference, right? So there should be some margin. But look at this. We found that one particular company, the margin is 147%. And if you just get rid of that, the margin becomes 25 to 27%. So there is some clear indication between the gap of import price and what the price they're selling. So yeah, this is some presence of distortion, or even, you know, if I may say, corruption is being present there. Yeah, so my last slide on policy recommendation, rather than beating around the bush, very specific policy recommendation. There is a 26% import duty on agricultural machineries. We don't need that. This is almost counterintuitive. You are giving subsidy and you're imposing duty. Get rid of the duty on those things. Have an evidence-based targeting program rather than just saying, okay, coastal area will get this, our area will have this. We could have a targeted geographical targeting in terms of what amount of subsidy should go. If not, just give it to the market. The market will decide, and we can say that, okay, these are the optimal rate of subsidy these areas should get. And then if not, at least standardize the subsidy rate in all through Bangladesh. So there should be some program with the Krishi Bank, because as we have seen, the formal loans are so low. So Krishi Bank could have help them with higher purchase financing as well. Remove restriction. We have found some very funny restriction that you can't transfer the ownership of combined harvester even within your family. So remove that. Remove the movement from subsidized machines across districts. So that's another kind of counterintuitive rule. So you should get rid of this. And lastly, we should train the DAE, Department of Agriculture Extension engineers, so that they can strengthen the technical skill among machine operators and service providers. Thank you so much.
Of Mehrab, who's going to be presenting on essentially under the heading of social protection.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Every year I look forward to this time of the year where I can, interact with BIDS colleagues, development economists, and researchers in Dhaka. So this is a work on, promoting sustained poverty reduction and resilience through social protection programs in Bangladesh. And this is a joint work with Dr. Akhtar Ahmed, our famous Akhtar Bhai, Dr. John Hardnott, Shalini Roy, and Dr. Melissa Hidrabo. Okay, so cash and food transfer programs can effectively increase household consumption and reduce household poverty in the short term. This is very well established, right? But the evidence is a bit mixed when you look a bit in the longer term. How sustainable are these interventions? And in particular, when it comes to income growth after programs end, after livelihood strategies, etc. Look, how well do social protection programs do? And recent evidence suggests that the sustainability of the impact of the social protection programs depend on two things, or two major things, right? One is the size of the transfer, so how big the transfer is, right? And number two is what other complementary programming are there on top of the cash transfer itself. So what has been found is that transfer sizes should be meaningful. And when transfers are bundled with other components that promote sustained income generation. So for example, it could be bundled with an asset transfer, for example. It could be an intensive training program. So these complementary programming seem to have a sustained impact when instead of when just cash is provided. So our specific research was with the WFP, the World Food Program in Bangladesh. So we collaborated with the World Food Program and essentially implemented a randomized control trial. It's called the TMRI, Transfer Modality Research Initiative. This was a 2-year cluster randomized trial that was targeted to ultra-poor households in rural Bangladesh. And this was implemented between 2012 and 2014. So already we have, it's been about more than 10 years, right? And a good time actually to look into the longer term effects of this program. So in the transfer, in terms of the treatment arms, there was a monthly cash or food transfer. This was worth around 1,500 taka. So just to contextualize what that means, it was around 25% of their household income. And this transfer was provided with or without group-based nutrition behavior change communication. What does that mean? Essentially, it's an intensive training program that is geared towards improving household nutrition knowledge, etc. So I can describe a bit more on that. But the broader question is, in these different modalities of transfers with and without the intensive training, which intervention is most effective for improving child nutrition? So that was a question that our partner as well as we had. And also if these interventions can also affect households' resilience, income generation, and women's empowerment in the longer term. So just to give a summary of it, the TMRI showed that combining cash transfers with nutrition BCC So essentially the cash plus BCC together, that leads to significant improvement in child nutrition status and longer term improvements in household consumption, resilience, and women's empowerment. So like I mentioned, this was implemented between 2012 and 2014. And the targeted households were poor households, extremely poor households with infants between 0 and 24 months old. And the transfer was given to the women. The randomization was at the village level. The treatment arms, so there were two different areas, the north and the south. So in the north, there was the cash transfer arm, right? People were given cash, like 1,500 taka I mentioned before. The food transfer of the same value. And there was a cash plus nutrition BCC. So the intensive nutrition training. I'll explain more in a bit. In the south, the two treatments, the first treatments are the same. So cash and food was there, but the BCC was combined with the food transfer. Okay. In terms of the details, so it's around 1,500 taka per month, goes on for 2 years. So that adds up to around $240 per year. And this could be in cash or in food. So for food, the bundled food that was provided was 30 kilogram of rice, 2 kilogram of lentils, 2 liters of cooking oil. Like I said, this amount was around a quarter of household monthly income. All households received a mobile phone. And for the nutrition BCC component, right, it's important to know that the mothers of the children, right, because the requirement was you have to have a small child, an infant child, the mothers have to participate in weekly group nutrition sessions. And these are led by a trained community nutrition expert. And the curriculum covered infant and young child feeding, maternal nutrition, hygiene, etc. But there was a particular emphasis on home production of nutritious food. So think about homestead gardening of vegetables and fruits, and protein-rich food, for example, livestock and poultry. Okay, so I think overall, I think what you have to realize is that the intervention was designed, and it was kind of addressing two specific constraints, right? One constraint is knowledge constraint. Households may not know how to produce nutritious food. And the other one is credit constraint. They may not have the credit or the income to actually follow through on this knowledge and produce this nutritious food. So in terms of the characteristics at baseline, these were very poor households. More than 75% of the households were below the World Bank extreme poverty level. And little education, and most of their consumption went after food. In terms of data, there were several rounds, so 2012, 2014, 2018, and 2022. The 2012 was the baseline before the program started, and it went on for the next 10 years or so. Currently, we're collecting the 12-year post-program data. Maybe next year I'll be presenting those results. So some things not to worry about. So for a randomized control trial, it's important that at baseline, right, you're randomizing the treatment to different groups, right? They should look approximately the same. They should be looking similar. The attrition rate should be low over time. There should not be differential attrition. So the different treatment groups should not have differential attrition. So all these things, you don't have to worry about it. Check out the paper if you are. In terms of outcomes that we were trying to look into. So at first, I'll show you consumption results. So consumption is measured as the sum of the value of total food and total non-food expenses. And the food consumption was based on a 7-day recall modules and covered over 300 plus food items. Quantities consumed out of own production and food received from other sources were valued using price data collected at the village level. And then these were all added together. For the total value of the non-food consumption, this was a 1-month recall for items that are purchased with some frequency, but things that are actually bought a bit less frequently. So think about clothes, footwear, that had a 1-year recall. The total value of food consumption and non-food expenses were converted to monthly values and then divided by the number of household members to obtain consumption expenditure per person per month. Okay, so the first table, I'm not sure how well you can see it. So if you look on the left panel, right, the red highlighted numbers. So essentially you see that between 2012 and 2022, there was a secular increase in consumption of more than 50%, so around 50%. So control groups who didn't receive anything, those households, their consumption between these 10 years increased by 50%. So essentially everybody was becoming better off, everybody was doing better, their income had increased. So that is for the control group. And similarly for the North, for the South is the numbers is quite similar, around 44% increase between 2012 and 2022, okay? Now we want to look into the differential effect of the treatment groups, okay? So on the left is the North. I'm really sorry, this looks very hazy. Let me just, I can tell you what's happening, okay? So in 2014, immediately after the program ended, there was a large impact for all the different groups, right? So cash, food, and cash plus BCC, right? All these three different groups had higher levels of consumption compared to the control group. The smallest impact was for the food group. So it had around 10% increase over the control group. And the largest was for the cash plus BCC households, which had a 27% increase over the control group. So this was immediately after the program ended. Fast forward, into 2022, what we find is that the effect of food goes away. The effect of cash is around 8% higher compared to the control group, but for cash plus BCC, it's 13%. So even after 8 years after the program ended, cash plus BCC households have a 13% higher consumption compared to the control group, and the cash group had almost half that effect. Okay, for the South. There's no impact. The cash only group doesn't show any impact. The food group doesn't, and the food plus BCC doesn't. But interestingly, in 2018, you can see that the food plus BCC has some impact. So this you could think of as a relatively close to the pure impact of the BCC itself, because there wasn't any specific arm like that. So this is in terms of extreme poverty. So this was what we find is that extreme poverty actually fell in the control group over time. So you can just look at the constant, or you can say it. So in 2014, around 50% of the control group were extremely poor. In 2022, this came down to 20%. So a 30 percentage point decline in extreme poverty for the control group, right? But for the cash plus BCC households, there was a further 7.7% decline, right? So cash plus BCC households in terms of extreme poverty were doing quite well, right? So both in terms of total value of the consumption, also if you have this cutoff and have an indicator of extreme poverty in both indicators, you can see that cash plus BCC households after 8 years, they're doing better, more resilient, etc. So what does it really mean in terms of food consumption? So these are two specific indicators. So one is the FIES, the Food Insecurity Experience Scale. This was developed by FAO, and on the right-hand side is the Food Consumption Score, FCS. So on the left-hand side, it essentially means how insecure a household is. So cash plus BCC households are likely to be less food insecure. In other words, they're likely to be more food insecure, and that actually appears consistently across the different years. And food consumption score essentially is a measure of their diversity of their nutrition. So they're eating different types of food. So just to tell you exactly what's happening here. So it's for FIES, the left panel before. So over there, so questions on if a household had skipped a meal, if they had fewer kinds of food, if they ran out of food. So for these indicators, you see that these households are less impacted. So they seem to be more resilient in terms of food consumption. And this is about the diversity of food. You can see that cash plus BCC households, they're doing better in terms of vegetables, fruits, pulses, all this protein consumption, they're doing significantly better. Okay, so what do this really mean? Why is this happening? What are the mechanisms behind it? So, of course, I thought I had 3 minutes after the ding ding, no? No? Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, okay. I'm going to finish it. Okay, so essentially what we find is that cash flow business households, they're actually, their livelihoods are different. They're actually earning in a different way, okay? So women are more involved in livestock and poultry. Men are doing more high-value crop farming. So these are actually making them, in terms of income growth, etc., like much better. So just to give you a sense of what does it mean for Bangladesh and Bangladesh social protection programs. So Bangladesh has a number of social protection programs. So we had a food security report where it actually showed the targeting effectiveness of the major programs. Please check it out. I think so. There are several social protection programs that actually provides money. So mother and child benefit program, old age allowance for the financially insolvent disabled folks. So going back to my first slide, the amount is too small. Okay, so make the amount meaningful, make it larger, and add complementary programming to it. So BRAC has the UPG program, the Ultra Pro Graduation program, where they show that if you add a meaningful asset with a transfer, that does wonderful things for their welfare. So in our case as well, if you can add an intensive BCC training with cash, that can be very, very helpful for poor households. Thank you so much.
I'll take the Dr. Asaduzman methodology of taking something left first, left as far as I'm concerned, here, and then some from the right, but we'll answer all questions together at the end, and we'll bundle them up. But please, let's not have speeches, let's have precise engagements. You may have a list yourself of things you want to say, but I think you could just restrict yourself to one per intervention, please.
Thank you. Very good presentation. In fact, very methodical. I have one question for Ben. This is, you found out that I'm thinking about between fisheries and rice, because rice is a seasonal product versus fisheries is a continuous product, harvesting possible. So you see a lower markup for the wholesaler. Is it because of the continuous flow? That's my question to you. I'm just thinking, and the second thing is that there has been a significant growth in auction market. So is it because of the auction market's contribution to the whole reduction of the wholesale's profit? That's one. Can I give two more questions?
Because it's you.
Sorry. This is the question for Moogdho, and this is an interesting one. What you have done BCR, and I think my question was whether this is including the capital cost, whether you have included that. And second is when you have treated 26 number of MSPs, districts are all different in size. So whether you have looked into that, I'm pretty sure you did. Just a query that I have. And the last presentation, I'm trying to understand whether we can conclude the net impact as the impact of the training or nutrition training, because food almost disappeared, impact in the long run. Cash also disappeared. So cash plus BCC had impact. So whether I can say this is only BCC? Thank you. Just a curious question for you.
Thank you. All the three presentations are highly interesting, particularly from policy point of view. But each of these seem to have one or two issues which all economists grapple with from their first year in economics when they go to the university. If we look at the aquaculture one, the first question that arises is the behavior of wholesalers or marketing agents separate or different from what happens in case of open capture fisheries? Okay. If there is, why this difference? And the second one, I had been telling the Akash beside me, when we had been explaining the aquaculture market and that, I said that this seems to be the perfect competition syndrome that we hear in the first year in the university. One thing which you have not, or if you have, but I have not noted it, is the characteristics of the farm. When you were saying it FARM, these are actually also FIRM. So this is quite different from usual agriculture farm. See, so and their size, the background of the owner, the entrepreneurs, and all that are quite different. And the way the aquaculture ponds are, I think, acquired, and that also had behind them, if the usual perception that is, they're quite powerful people. And if so, then the characteristics of the farms are different from the usual agriculture farm. And that may be one of the basic reasons why they can, with the marketing intermediary, play at the same level. And that's why they can get much better return than elsewhere. That is number one. You may have to think about it.
Cut you off there, please. Just to spread the questions around a bit, if I may. Thanks. Okay. Professor over there in the back. From back, you. Yeah.
Thank you. A very brief question to Mr. Mehrab Bakhtiar. You mentioned about women's empowerment in your study. I was interested to know what aspect of women's empowerment did your study cover? And you also mentioned about weekly discussions on nutrition among the mothers. So I was interested to know if these discussions also include fathers with regard to nutrition, because I was wondering, because you are also talking about empowerment, so how much voice do these women have in making decision of what kind of foods to purchase and other nutritious issues? Thank you.
One more here.
Okay. My point is you can't understand all these things without understanding the capitalist development in agricultural sector. Why? I will just take 3 questions from 3 papers. First is, in the aquaculture, the point that our Asaduzaman sir raised, there is a difference between FARM and FIRM. FIRM is a large-scale capitalist in the urban sector. He or she may go to the village and create a vertically integrated structure of aqua market. In that case, you need to examine whether it is there or not. This is my first question. If that is so, then free market or perfect market syndrome can be present, and also side by side that can be replaced by competition from those FIRMs. So that paradigm can be checked. And again, the same thing in the case of harvest combiner. Who is the importer and what he is doing with that? Whether he is having a vertically integrated structure of operations from rural to urban, from import, whether he has agents in the village to sell the service of harvest combined. That is question to Moogdho. And the third is poverty. Poverty, you found that just giving some aid or relief does not create the resilience. That is understood. But you suggested that if you give him some training and some asset or some credit, then he can find out his resilience. But that will not happen. He will be competing with other more bigger agents and will fail again. And this kind of relief and petty credit and petty training will not solve the problem of poverty.
Thanks. Now we go to.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for your nice presentation, all three. I have two queries to two presenter actually. First of all, Ben Bentor. He's a very famous researcher in aquaculture, we all know. And today he presented that the wholesale market issue in Bangladesh. He started with markets are poorly competitive, and particularly I am interested about the expansion of live market, whether it is increasing in Bangladesh at wholesale level. Those who are applying modern technology, are they doing better profit? But you mentioned the wholesaler as a whole making profit 4 to 5%, which is, it seems it is competitive, but I don't know in true sense whether this wholesale market is too competitive or not. But if you just mention about the live fish marketing at wholesaler level, would be benefited. And the next issue is on Moogdho's paper. He started with whole mechanization, I believe, but he made it narrow to the combined harvester. As we know, in the coastal area and the our area, its use is higher, particularly because it is risky area, right? But other parts of the country, they are also using. But I don't know whether still government has duty 26%, but they are also providing subsidy for less, I should say risky area, but less area of the country. So rather it could be generalized for decreasing the cost of harvesting throughout the country. This is my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I have a question for Mehrab Bakhtiar, but I want to, say my question in Bangla. মেহরাব ভাই, আমি আসলে জানতে চাচ্ছিলাম আপনি যে গবেষণায় দেখিয়েছেন যে আমরা যদি ক্যাশ ইনসেন্টিভের সাথে বিসিসি অর্থাৎ কিছু নিউট্রিশনাল ট্রেনিং দিই তাহলে এই প্রোগ্রামটা আমাদের সোশ্যাল সেফটি নেট বিশেষ করে পভার্টি দারিদ্রতা নিরসনের ক্ষেত্রে ভালো ভূমিকা রাখে। এখন আমাদের বাংলাদেশ সরকারের যে খুব বহুল প্রচলিত দুইটা প্রোগ্রাম আছে, ভিজিডি আর হচ্ছে ইনভেস্টমেন্ট কম্পোনেন্ট অফ ভিজিডি, আইসিভিজিডি। তো আপনার গবেষণাটা কি এটা বলে যে ভিজিডি এবং আইসিভিজিডির চেয়ে আপনার প্রস্তাবিত যে ফর্মুলা সেটা অধিক কার্যকর, মানে গভর্নমেন্টের এই দিকে চিন্তা করা উচিত কিনা? আর সেকেন্ড হচ্ছে এখন তো সোশ্যাল মিডিয়ার যুগ, এখন আমরা মোবাইল ফোন টিভি সবকিছুই জানি, তো নিউট্রিশন স্পেসিফিক ট্রেনিংটা কি আসলেই সেরকম কোনো বেনিফিট দিতে পারবে? নিউট্রিশন নিয়ে কি গ্রামের মহিলারা এমনি তথ্যগুলা জানতে পারবেন না? থ্যাংক ইউ।
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jeff, for giving me the floor. I'm Azreen Karim from BIDS. First of all, I'd like to thank all the three presenters. I think all of these three studies are very rigorous in terms of methodology. But I'm sure Jeff is going to conclude by wrapping up all the policy recommendations where I'm facing some good issues, because I don't see the good connection between the outcomes and the policies in particular. For example, let me start with Dr. Moogdho's paper. This is a good paper, and he said, well, BIHS data is one of the best panel data in the world, which I don't agree all the time, because we often find issues with crop size and plot sizes. What I saw in the policy recommendation, let me put my comments on that. Most of the recommendations look like it is asking the government to do something, right? So my question is, what is your policy recommendations for the private sector? How can actually government implement your policy by incorporating the private sector, right? So that's a clear one. And to Dr. Mehrab, if I can recall, there's a similar type of study which has been presented in the last year's ABCD as well. I'm not sure who presented that, but on behalf of IFPRI, but it was you. Okay. So probably my question is targeted to in that direction as well, that exactly where you made the advancement, because what I found thinking through is, if I could recall it correctly, that the same conclusion we got it last year as well. So what you have added this year? Okay, and exactly where you are fitting to the policies as well. So I mean, in fact, I'm having trouble in trying to get to, a punchline from all of these three papers. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. First question to Dr. Belton. You said the physical loss is zero, almost zero, right? None to zero. So did you compare like other value gain as well? So value gain means from I carry fish from one market to another, there should be some value gain. So what is the net value gain? Positive value gain plus loss, physical loss. One more thing, women employment is very low in value chain, aquaculture value chain, but there are a lot of literature that say they explore women empowerment with aquaculture. So why is that? Did you compare these with other agri sector as well?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right. So I give each presenter a couple of minutes to we go in the same sequence, and then I'll make a few remarks at the end. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for some excellent questions. So, yeah, the first one was about the sort of difference in the markup that aquaculture traders are making versus, say, rice or potato or other agricultural commodity traders. And yeah, is it to do with the seasonality of supply? So I think that might be a big part of it. So aquaculture is not completely aseasonal, but it's fairly constant supply year round, where obviously rice or potatoes, there's a big peak in supply and then a long period without supply. So there's more scope for sort of temporal arbitrage, I guess you could say, sort of buying when it's cheap and then holding onto it and selling it later when the price rises. Whereas with fish, it's fresh, it has to be sold immediately. So that might account for part of that difference. Yeah, there's also a question about how is aquaculture different to capture fisheries in terms of the sort of the behavior of traders, I guess particularly maybe in respect to providing dadon. So they're quite different activities. You capture fisheries, you have quite large investments in boats and then fuel, labor, and so on. And so it's a lot more common in capture fisheries value chains for there to be that output tied credit, because it's really impossible for fishers to obtain that capital anywhere else. And I think for aquaculture producers, there's potentially a lot more other sources of investment that they can use to invest in inputs for the farms. So there's sort of income from off-farm employment, income from other agricultural activities. They often get inputs like feed on credit. And so they have sort of more options open to them. They're less sort of dependent on being, and sort of relationships where they might end up in sort of interlocking markets. And then there was a question, I think, sort of how different are aquaculture farms to, farms growing paddy and other agricultural products. So I think in the context where this study took place in southern Bangladesh, you can say that these are sort of fairly specialized commercial operations. But are they sort of firms in the sense of being, large vertically integrated businesses? No, they're not. I mean, typically they're sort of half an acre in size. The production costs are probably definitely going to be higher than for somebody growing only rice, for instance. But so there's sort of kind of an intermediate category maybe. Yeah, I can know. There was a question about live fish marketing. Is that more profitable than selling dead fish? That's a good question. We haven't unpacked that one. And yeah, I think that's good.
Thank you. Thank you. Great set of questions. So to start with, I would start with Dr. Enam's question. Enam bhai, fantastic set of questions. So the first part, yes, for the benefit cost ratio, we did consider the production side or the rental side cost. And it brings a very important point actually. What we have found that this combined harvester rental market is very competitive. So we haven't found that people are trying to get advantage, having combined harvester. People do have information. So the rental market was quite competitive, even in the treatment and control areas. In terms of the different characteristics of districts, yes, we did have a district fixed effect that controls for all the characteristics that is not temporarily changing. And we also had sub-district fixed effect, which is like lower geographic areas controlling for sub-district related factors, and the results remain same. Now, going back to my dear teacher, Akar sir question, it's interesting that it's like 20 years ago exactly, I was sitting in sir's class and still we're debating this beautiful philosophical question of economics that I still get from sir, and I'm forever indebted to him for that. Sir, just to address your point, overall, there is a presence of oligopolistic market over here. So it's not perfectly competitive. In the capitalist structure, we're only observing only few players who are the importers. And as expected, that was my slide about, someone is trying to take advantage of it. If you completely would have left it for market, or we expected, better decisions from these importers, we had observed a little less margin. But yes, there is some inefficiency created by this oligopolistic competition. But good news is that when we presented this work to Minister of Agriculture, they're pretty serious about it, and they opened up investigations what is happening within this market. Second thing is that, as you know, the competition, the subsidy is completely shut down right now. So there might be, I'm not sure when the new subsidy program will come, and hopefully this anomalies that we are seeing in this oligopolistic market would be addressed by the government. Yeah. So, and then the third intervention, yes, we completely agree with you, and we have another paper that we have written that we have presented the areas for geographical targeting. So which district should receive more subsidy depending on the different like 10, 15 set of variables within that district. And we can recommend, okay, this particular district might have received more subsidy than just being a coastal or hard area. So we have written a paper on that. But in general, if there is no rules, let's make a very concrete single subsidy for everyone. So we agree with that. Coming back to Dr. Azin's question, yeah, it was a bit self-pompous saying that BIHS is one of the better or the best ones, but just for your information, there are 150 PhD papers all around the world have been written by BIHS. I would love to know more about any other panel data that have produced so many PhD papers, number one. But number two, yes, there are some mistakes in the BIHS, and we are always open for correcting those mistakes. In terms of the policy recommendation, that's my last point. For the private sector, that's a very good one, actually. So we talked to the private sector as well. And as you can see, the main problem over here, private sector is always asking for more and more and more subsidy, as if without subsidy, they will not survive. But what we have found in last 1 year, when the subsidy program stopped, they're still surviving, and they're surviving in a very good way. Maybe they need some other support, but the question is, we might not need 50 to 70% subsidy, and the private sector can help us with that. Thank you.
Should I go ahead? Oh, thank you so much for all the great comments. So I think, just broadly speaking, the evidence gap in the literature is on longer term effects of this kind of transfer programs. Okay, so just worldwide, there is a dearth of evidence if transfer programs in the longer term, if the effects sustain or not. So I think that is something specific that we have done in our research. Last year, it was, I think, Shalini Roy, it wasn't me, who was presenting the medium-term effects, so 4-year post-program effects. So this is 8-year post-program effects. The results are similar, but the effect size is going, is declining over time. And essentially, the control group, as I showed, are catching up. Okay. Now, so broadly speaking, Enam sir asked about, is it just the cash itself, or is it the BCC itself? So I think what this program did was it attacked multiple constraints that an extremely poor household faces. An extremely poor household may not have the information, the network, or the money. If you provide them information about, for example, how to invest into productive assets, how to invest into productive income generation activities, they may know that information, but they may not have the money to act on it. If you attack both constraints, knowledge, meaningful knowledge, because this was a 2-hour intensive training every week for 2 years. Okay, so if you do this kind of training in a meaningful way, high quality training for a long time, and if you complement that with a transfer, and again, a sizable transfer, not like 200-300 taka, as we have seen for many of the transfers in the government, that together, I think, makes an impact, not just the short term, but in the longer term. And that goes to Dr. Akash's point about what is the point of these reliefs and handouts. Reliefs and handouts have their efficacy. If for example, if there's a cyclone, there's a big aggregate shock, you need to help the people, right? But the thing is, this may not lead to longer term welfare improvement. So what we show is a very specific case, how longer term improvement can happen. There's a question on women's empowerment. So the weekly discussion, both husbands and wives were invited. The mother-in-laws were also invited. But I think I probably didn't mention it properly. So the transfer itself was given to the women, but the training program, the 3 members of the households were invited, including husbands. And in terms of empowerment outcomes, we find that it's called WEA, Women's Economic Empowerment in Agriculture. So over there, we find sustained effect. But interestingly, what Shalini presented last year was also on intimate partner violence. So there was a lowering of intimate partner violence for women. And one possible path is that there is more interaction between the women in a group setting that's possibly is improving the social capital, connectivity, and outside option, as they call it in economics. About the VGT plus ICVGT programs, those are points that we also want to make. But I think I would disagree with the assumption that because of mobile phones, everybody knows the information, right? I mean, we also have the information. Do we know everything? We don't, right? We often get surprised. And then the next point is on enforcement and reinforcement on good information, right? But that needs to happen properly. And I think a lot of the times, I think we underestimate how these poor households, extremely poor households, like if you study them for a long time, there are studies showing that they are so stressed all the time. All these things that we take for granted, they're super stressed. Like they did a study with cortisol. They found that they have very high levels of cortisol. So yeah, I'll just stop there. Thank you so much.
I stand between you and your nutrition now. So I'll try and keep my comments short. Let me just engage with aquaculture. The book I was a co-author of was the result of several years of work up in the Parbatipur area, of northwest Bangladesh. And the book was called Trading the Silver Seed. In other words, it was a reference to the supply chain into culture fisheries, not so much the value chain after. So you can accuse me of raising something that you were not focused on, and I accept that. But what we certainly did find that a lot of the rent that came out of the fish culture system came on the supply side rather than on the value chain side. So we were looking at the behavior out of DARs and so on and so forth. And we were also looking at the behavior of the village level supply peppery, who were supplying fish fry into ponds and so on. And that's where we found where the most rent came out. But broadly speaking, I'm intrigued by the study because it looks like, from my experience several decades ago, that what was a highly, how can I put it, mechanized system of supply management and so on, with the adult DARs taking these incredible monopolistic and oligopolistic positions. It looks like the proposition here is that this is all being cleaned out by competition. Now, if that can happen in the aquaculture sector, then I guess we really need to know why that process occurred and apply the model elsewhere in Bangladesh. Our friend Mr. Warideen might be very pleased with seeing that happen. Let's go to, I've got more things to say, but I won't. Let's go to the mechanized harvesting point here. And I've got a couple of points, really. One is that I assume that the bulk of the work is in relation to the Boro season. That must be the case because you're dealing with a Hawa where you've got the bulk of the subsidy and the bulk of the activity. So obviously there will over time be a question of whether combine harvesters break out of the Boro season into other seasons of the year, and that might be affected by climate change in a big way. But what the implications of combine harvesters, it seems to me, in the Hawa area is that it's also going to disturb, maybe a good thing, the patterns of rural to rural labor migration. Because of course, in the past, the Hawa area has attracted huge in-migration of labor during the Boro harvest because it doesn't reside there for the rest of the year. So there will be knock-on transformational effects there, I think. The other point I want to make, which is in a way a more profound one, is that I'm not precisely quoting, but there's some phrase to the effect of modest benefit to farmers by combine harvesters. But here I want to challenge the use of the word farmer, because it seems to me that combine harvesters represent lumpy investment. So they're not small scale machines and the rest of it, they're large scale lumpy investment, and they need really to have returns of a scale on them to be able to operate in large areas of land which are not divided up by awkward bunds and so on. And that leads to this hypothesis that Sathamandal and I are working on about seeing the spread of operational consolidation, in which scattered plots are increasingly being grouped together. The ownership is not being lost. The title remains with the holder, but those plots are being grouped together into larger command areas for irrigation. We're familiar with that concept, but command areas for everything else as well, from plot preparation, ploughing, and all the rest of it, up to the combine harvester, and then potentially in the future on to post-harvest processing. So it would be interesting to attach the issue of operational consolidation to the introduction of large-scale mechanization. And then finally, coming to Mehrab, I have interests here too, sorry about that, but I was involved in the Shiri program, as indeed was Sulfika later on, for 8 years in the last decade. So there are one or two points that come out of that. Zulfikar is now here, and he might want to refute what I'm just about to say, but I think it's right from our study, and we finished a major study for the Planning Commission during COVID, is that there was a very significant positive impact of mothers' education on child nutrition under cash and kind transfers. So that was a quite important, perhaps additional finding to your thinking. On the methodological side, I think that, as it were, you can't avoid doing qualitative work here. And I think the issue here is the difference between graduation and resilience. And there's so much measurement work done on the idea of graduation, but graduation isn't the objective here. Resilience is the objective. And you can only test that resilience over a much longer time period. I come back to my friend Akash's point about getting into the political economy of the structures within which people live. And one of the things that we found is that people graduate maybe for a year or two, but then something else happens to them, and much of that happens in the local political economy. And we wrote papers on protecting the gains. How do you protect what it is that you've initially achieved in the political economy? And you can't do that as individuals. So you're back to some forms of collective action in order to confront the hostile political economy around you. And it seems to me that so we did tracking studies. We took households well sampled, and we tracked them for several years after the program. And if there was a donor around that would give us the money to carry on tracking, we do that too, in order to really get an understanding of how people's fortunes go up and down, rather than graduate and feel that the story has finished. One more point, and I will stop. We can go and have lunch. This thing about the size of the transfer. Now, it seems to me there's a difference between trying to solve a family's consumption, imperative consumption in the short term, and trying to, in a sense, engineer behavioral changes in the longer term. Now, as far as I'm concerned, one definition of poverty is that poor people have a higher discount rate of the future. And it seems to me then that all policy interventions should be trying to actually change poor people's sense of their discount rate of the future. And you won't do that with small transfers. You have to hit it big so that you can really make an impact upon people's time preference behavior and the way in which they have attitudes towards savings and investment in the future. You won't do that with small amounts of money. So I agree with that finding strongly. Okay, I'm done. I hope everybody else is. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Jeff, for the sharing the session and the presenters. We have a difficult time ahead. First of all, lunch and the time management. Right now is 1:24. So we don't think we